Hello, Mindset Recovery friends. This is Roberto. I recently picked up a year clean, and I have been making a video about every 30 days as to my progress in recovery. And so I've now made it 13 months. And so, true to form, I am going to make a video on my progress and talk about the things that have worked for me and give a little bit of my experience. So I don't really have a lot of followers on this channel. People, I'm sure, find it randomly, but it was originally designed for me to keep track of my progress, be able to look back and see, my progression through the stages of recovery, and also with keeping the addict who has struggled as I have in mind to maybe see some of the pitfalls and give them some hope and, show what's worked for me so that maybe they can avoid some of the pitfalls that I had to endure in order to get the success that I now enjoy. So, if you've ever watched my channel before, then you kind of know that I've been in and out of this program, struggling with addiction for over 30 years. I figured out when I was about 18 years old that alcohol and drugs were a challenge for me. I tried on many occasions to moderate my use to no avail, limited success, but pretty much just substitution of one substance for another that was, in my opinion, less detrimental, but nothing really worked. Combinations of drugs, trying to limit my usage to certain days. It's all classic addict mentality. We all think that we're going to be able to figure this thing out. I certainly thought, being an intelligent person, that I was going to devise a strategy that was going to work for me. So I started going to 12-step meetings back in the early 90s when I was in my early 20s. I would go on and off, getting a little bit of success and then giving up or thinking that I had it under control and go back out and try my hand again at the game, only to fail. And my unique case has been that I moderated well enough so that I was able to come to this program without having lost everything. I never spent any length of time in jail. I had, DUI offenses where I went to jail for a short period of time, but, I always ended up getting out of it with lawyers or whatever. So that just emboldened me that, I was different than everyone else. And, I didn't have a DUI. I didn't hurt anybody in a car accident. So I was fine. I wasn't using what I considered to be hard drugs. The first NA meeting that I went to, the it was a speaker meeting, and the guy was sharing about a drug that I had never even seen before, but I had heard about. Um, and so it was a way for me to look for differences between me and the other people in the room. And when I got here, a lot of people, according to the literature, they look for the differences and how they're unique and why they don't need to be with the rest of those people. And in the end, what I found was I had to figure out a way to identify with the people in the room and look for similarities and not differences, and become part of a fellowship where I could get plugged in and have people who understand how my addict brain works help me with the struggles that I was having. And eventually, what I've figured out through step work and being in this program is that I didn't mature because, I found something that I thought was working for me in my teenage years to cover up my pain and find a way to distract myself from the things that were bothering me. And that was drugs and alcohol. And, that seemed to be working for me. So that was the only thing I knew how to do. And that's what I continue to run back to. So when I knew it was a problem and I tried to get out of it. And when the rubber met the road and it started to get really hard, I just told myself, well, if I just don't drink as much, or I just stay away from this drug or that drug, or I don't do it as often, and I just, whatever. Always some kind of a strategy. Excuse me. Never a long-term effective strategy. So, in 2019, after a slow burn, 53 years old, I got to the point where I had a stroke from not taking care of myself. I had health issues, being overweight, from drinking alcohol, and having no self-control with food. Got diabetes and high blood pressure. And then my drug of choice was one that would really raise my blood pressure. So I was already having problems with blood pressure. So inevitably I had a stroke. And that got my attention. It didn't solve my issue. I didn't, have an epiphany and say, oh, I had a stroke, so now I'll never use drugs again. I thought that, but that did not prove to be the case. So I ended up finding myself unable to stop, but I knew where the answer was. So I got into some outpatient rehab, got reintroduced to 12-step program, learned some coping skills, started to apply them, got plugged in a 12-step program. Suggestion that they have, they're like, we've never seen anybody who's followed this program the way it was designed to be followed that's ever used again. That's a pretty big promise. You never have to use again, and we can tell you how. Well, and as I've said before in previous videos, if you want what we have, you have to do what we did. And I wanted what the people in that room had. I wanted a better life. I didn't want to be miserable. I didn't want to use against my will, but I didn't want to do what they were doing because that took discipline. And I was misapplying my discipline to how can I continue to support my habit and do drugs and pay my bills, instead of how can I attack this with the same furiosity as I applied to continuing to have ways and means to get more. And so if I apply even half of that discipline to not using and figuring out what to do instead of using, then I can be successful in this program. Because it's not a complicated program. It's a simple program, but it is not an easy program, because it requires me to apply discipline and not do things that I want to do, and look at the big picture and set my eyes on the prize and say, okay, the goal here is to not die. The goal here is to not be poor. The goal here is to not be miserable and unhealthy. So, if I get high today, I'm going to feel better for a little while, but ultimately I am going to feel crappy about myself. And, I know I've heard it said before from people in the program, if I feel bad about myself long enough, I will use to cover up that pain. And so I have to learn a new way to live. And that's spiritual principles that I'm introduced to through the program, any 12-step program, but specifically in this one, Narcotics Anonymous, teach me how to do things differently so that I don't feel like a piece of junk. Because when I was living dirty and choosing short, making decisions based on immediate gratification instead of long-term goals, I felt bad about myself. When I choose to go back out and do drugs again instead of going for the long haul and trying to do the right thing, I feel bad about myself because I'm making bad decisions. So, today I choose to have discipline. And so, like what I was starting to say before, some of the suggestions when you get in the program are go to 90 meetings in 90 days, which sounds overwhelming to somebody who has one day without using. I got to do this 90 times in a row, 90 days in a row. But after you start doing it 30 to 60, get close to 90 days, it becomes a habit and it gets easier, and you're getting in a routine of doing something healthy instead of a routine of getting up and figuring out what am I going to do to get one more today. And so that starts a different cycle in your life. You get a sponsor, because a sponsor is a person who has worked the 12 steps and has stayed clean for a period of time. The minimum is normally suggested to be a year, but generally I think people who have long-term sobriety or clean time, 5, 10, 20 years, those people clearly have the strategies down a lot better than someone who has a year clean. I mean, I can tell you things that worked for me that I have more experience than someone who doesn't have a year clean has. But, my sponsor has 10 years clean. He's been through a lot of the things that I'm going through in early recovery that, he knows what to do. He's seen it in his life. He's seen it in many people's lives that he's worked with and had friendships with, and he can steer me in the right direction. Sponsors don't normally give you advice. They're urged not to give advice. They're urged to give suggestions. So if I say, hey, I've been clean 60 days and I'm going to go back to the trap house and talk to all my buddies and tell them how great it is. Believe it or not, that sounds like a really good idea to somebody who's got 60 days for the first time, because they think, oh, hey, I know what's going on. No, I'm not going to ever use drugs again. Well, a person with substantial clean time will say, my suggestion is that you stay away from the trap house, that you don't hang out with people you used to use with. You don't go places where you used to use. It's a suggestion. If I say, no, screw you, I'm going to the trap house, well, they're not going to tie me up and prevent me from doing that. But ultimately, if I do make the decision to go back to the trap house and it doesn't go the way I thought it was going to go, then I know that their suggestion was a good one. And then maybe if I make it back into the rooms and I start this process over again, maybe next time my sponsor says, hey, I suggest that you do not do that, maybe I will listen to them. So a sponsor is a great idea. Home group is something that, any NA meeting that you go to can be a home group. They all have different times and days that they meet. But if you're doing 90 meetings in 90 days, you'll get exposed to several different groups, and you may feel more at home in some than others. And that's where you find your people, because I've been told in the program, as an addict, I am destined to hang out with addicts. So my choice is then to hang out with using addicts or to hang out with addicts that no longer are using. If I'm surrounding myself with like-minded people, and just like if I hang out with a bunch of people that go out to the bar and get drunk every night, probably I'm going to be getting drunk with them, at least occasionally, but probably every time. But if I hang out with people who are not using anymore and they're going out and learning how to live clean, then I can learn, because my misconception, because I used when I was feeling good to feel better. I used when I was feeling bad to feel better. I used because it was a Tuesday. I used because I had been using for 30 years and that's what I did. So that's what I knew how to do, and I was stuck in that cycle. So if you would have told me when I was using that I could go hang out with a bunch of people that weren't using and have a good time, that sounded extremely foreign to me. But the truth is, if my goal is to not ever use again, then unless somebody's going to lock me up in a 12 by 12 and prevent me from using, if I want to be a member of society and not have to use drugs, then I'm going to have to figure out how to enjoy my life without the use of drugs. And that's one of the things that you can do in NA. And a home group is a good introduction to that. You get to see some of the same people on a regular basis. You get to make friendships with them. You get to have a network. So like one of the biggest struggles I had in my early years of trying to get clean was that I didn't really have a connection with people that could help me. So when I got a sponsor, I expected my sponsor to be like my babysitter and always be there for me every time I reached out to them, that they were at my disposal. And that turned out to be an unrealistic expectation because sponsors are addicts just like me. They're just people who have been doing this longer. And so, sometimes they're asleep, sometimes they're out of town, sometimes they're at work. So if I think that every time I call them, they're going to answer the phone and be pearls of wisdom to me and tell me what to do, and then they don't answer the phone, then I used that as an excuse. Well, you didn't answer the phone and I really was struggling. So, oh well, I guess I gave you a chance to help me and you didn't. So now it's their fault that I decided to go get high, which is, it's not reality. But what I found for me in addiction is that I wasn't operating out of reality. I was making my own reality to justify my behavior. So what I found out was when I got numbers from people in the program and found people that I recognized and had talked to before, it was easier for me to reach out to them. And then if I was struggling and I couldn't get in touch with my sponsor, I had other people in the program who had experience not using that could, let me vent to them what I was going through, maybe give me some suggestions, give me some hope that, I remember one time I had made up my mind in early recovery that I was going to go use that day. And I was talking to my sponsor and I was just telling him basically, I have to go do it now because I made up my mind. And he was like, you don't have to. Your home group meets tonight. Because I was like, I know when I get off work, I'm going to go to my dope man's house or meet up with him somewhere. And he was like, well, instead of that, why don't you go to your home group? And I remember it was like the weight of the world was lifted off my shoulders because my addict brain was telling me, oh, well, you've already decided you're going to do it now, man. It's written in stone. You got to. And I'd been using against my will for so long. I was like, well, the slave master calls, I have to, obey. And for me to realize that, what, I don't have to go hook up with my dope man after work. Instead, I can go to this meeting. I was so happy when I got there. I shared about my struggles. And, I wasn't thinking about use anymore. By the time the meeting was going on, I got out of there. I went home. I don't remember what I did, but it didn't involve drugs or alcohol. And so, that got easier for me over time. So, they say that it doesn't get better, it gets different. But for me, my experience was that it was so crappy that different was better. And then the more I got used to doing something different, the easier it became for me to do something different on a regular basis. And now, instead of being the common thing for my brain to try to talk me into going out and doing something stupid, it's uncommon. It still pops up. I still have, bright ideas to go do something that I shouldn't be doing. But today, I'm not having to use against my will. I can say, no, I'm going to do this instead. I'm going to call somebody. I'm going to go, buy a steak. I mean, it's whatever works for the individual addict. You do that instead. So you end up tailoring the program to yourself after you're doing it properly instead of trying to change it to be easier, because my human nature is I always want to do the easy thing. And for me, not following this program the way it was designed was easy, but it wasn't effective. What's easy for me is to get high. That's the easy thing. For me to not get high, I have to apply the principles that I've learned in here, utilize the tools that I've learned in here. But after I've learned how to do that, then it becomes easier for me to do the right thing. So as a result of consistently doing the things I've learned in here, I have a morning routine of prayer and meditation and and reading program literature, reaching out to people, making a gratitude list. I mean, these are things that I've learned and I have figured it out. I'm going to make myself a cup of coffee. I'm going to, pray and meditate for X number of minutes. I'm going to do my readings. I'm going to drink my coffee. I'm going to reach out to my sponsor. Everybody has their routine that they tailor to their program the way that it works for them. And then, I start my day off in a positive mindset and it becomes familiar to me. And I have been able to continue to do that. And one of the things that I have done, the spiritual principles, you have a conscious contact with the higher power of your understanding, which doesn't have to be any particular higher power. I've talked about that in previous videos, just something that's more powerful than you. Because when I was using, I was my higher power and I thought that I had it under control, and that was delusional. Clearly, I don't have it under control if I can't stop using, but I had myself convinced. So now I have a higher power of my understanding that I commune with on a regular basis. And I've opened up that spiritual part of myself now to where I can get insight into decisions and kind of go in the right direction now. And if I'm getting ready to do something that's probably not a good idea, my conscience has been reawakened to say to me, yeah, maybe that's not the right way to go. How about we don't do that? And it's become easier for me to listen to that small voice inside me that gives me good suggestions instead of that small voice inside me that tells me to do stupid things, because they say in this program, it's jails, institutions, and death. So ultimately, addiction is such a cunning enemy of life. That means that if it's an enemy of life, it's trying to kill me. And I don't understand exactly how that works, but I do know that if I had continued on the path that I had been going for over 30 years, it would eventually have led me to a miserable death. I wasn't personally suicidal, but I know a lot of people get to that point of desperation where they think that would be a better option for them. Well, if my brain is telling me that it would be a better option for me to be dead than alive, it's not on my team anymore. That's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And what I'm learning today is how to solve those temporary problems and to accept the things I can't change. If my problem is something that's way bigger than me that I have no control over, stressing about that is not going to change it. So I have to accept the things I cannot change. But maybe I look at a situation and I think that it's beyond my control, but I figure out, or through suggestions from other people with more experience than me, or just taking a little bit of time to look at the problem differently and pause and pray or whatever it is you need to do, meditate, maybe you'll figure out that, there is something that I can do about this. But I know that when I was in the grips of addiction, that I couldn't have the self-control and the discipline to take that time. I was impulsive and I was like, well, I know the answer to this. The answer to this is to go get some alcohol or drugs. And today I can say, okay, if that's not something that I want to do, what can I do instead? And I'm growing and learning and maturing, because when I started using at the age of 14 and continued to do that until I was 53, I wasn't learning to be mature. I wasn't learning to live life on life's terms. I was learning to block it all out and kill the pain and numb it and think about it later, kick the can down the road a little bit. Let's just get high right now. And still end up having to deal with the problem, but, dealing with it high and maybe making the problem worse. So today I've learned not to do that. So anyway, I try to make these videos not too long, but the good news is that I have 13 months of continuous clean time, nights, weekends, paydays, holidays. I have not found an excuse or a reason to pick up drugs or alcohol in over 395 days. And that's a miracle, because the only thing that I can really expect from my addict brain is to use drugs and alcohol. So if I have conquered that in these last 395 days, that's something. I'm way healthier. I'm way happier. People around me are happier. I'm hopeful. I didn't have hope before. I was using against my will. I was miserable. I was bound to die from in this addiction. And today I don't have to live that way. So that's the good news. If you're in the sound of my voice, this program works. It's worked for me. It's worked for millions of people around the world. If you want to reach out to me, if you have any questions, if you need resources, like, where meetings are, or literature types of resources, not like I have a big fat trust fund and I give money out to people, because that is not the case. But the best way to contact me is my personal email, which is piaster67@hotmail.com. And that's PIAS as in Sam, T as in tornado, ER67@hotmail.com. And if you reach out to me through that email, it's the fastest way. Just put recovery or mindset recovery or help or something like that in the subject line, and I will get back in touch with you. And until I make another video, God willing, I'll still be clean in another month. It's a one day at a time, just for today program. But if I keep doing what I've been doing that's been successful, then I'll put together a lot of 24 hours. And, my plan is to not go back to where I was. So be encouraged. Finish strong. Keep fighting the good fight. This is Roberto signing off.